we'll be doing this I think 90 minutes exercise to understand the European politics, especially in the context of the right-wing, far-right parties taking a sort of quite a increasing relevance all over the Europe, not only just the European Union, but even beyond. And this is something like in WRF we have uh, been dabbling on European things, but not specifically on what's happening about European politics, because it's like an earthquake which is happening. And if you uh, just go back to the last year elections, the July elections and the European Union elections, and then France and several other countries. So something that a number of for many years actually a lot of people used to dismiss. This these are they're like fringe parties, and like they won't really uh, transform the European politics, especially the post-Nazi Europe, the way things had evolved. So, what things are changing now? Today, you have Meloni sitting as prime minister. It's a right-wing party. It's probably the first party after I think Mussolini, uh, and it's just not about Giorgio Meloni. You look at Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Germany, and Netherlands to Austria. So it's all over. So I think there is quite a significant transformation that has happened in last 7-8 years, and then you have now the upcoming German elections, which is also a lot of people are watching uh, anxiously what's going to happen. Uh, so this is also something to do with both side of Atlantic. It's just also in America and a number of places. Also, you see the right wing surge, which is setting the narrative. It's transforming the political discourse, the way democracy, the way many of those issues are being debated and addressed. Uh, so today we have with us two very distinguished panelists. Neeraj Prasad, of course, whose work I've been, he's a young scholar, rightly based, right now based in University of Amsterdam. And you have seen, those who follow Git Welder's, sort of sensational election last year, what's happening in Dutch country. So he's there since last few years to see what's happening, not only in Netherlands, also in across the Europe. And Neeraj Prasad, he teaches comparative politics in University of Amsterdam, political science, but he's been researching on political violence, elections, political parties, and a lot of them are in India. In fact, he has done a lot of work on the Bengal political violence. He has been tracking UP and several other places. So Neeraj is going to throw some lights on what's happening in Europe, other thing. And then the second person is my former colleague Brita Peterson. She's quite well known in Delhi circle and very seasoned journalist, scholar, and I would call her as a political philosopher because she's just not a sort of journalist or other thing, but she has the solid academic rigors on those phenomena, especially on European politics. Because I remember 2018 she wrote a long piece for ORF on rise of far right politics in Europe, and those of you can Google and find out that 2018 paper. I think that has everything what today we are witnessing. So she's currently heading the South Asia uh, office of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is a German-based think tank, which does a lot of work on social issues. So she's also going to throw some light on what's happening in Europe and also maybe with specific reference to also what's happening in Germany. So I'll first invite Brita to give a broad brush about what's happening in European politics and the triggers, the structural factors, and what sort of impact, implication it will have not only for the European politics, other things, also something like European Union, because it is it is in many way the right wing has a sort of Euro skepticism. They lot of those parties, lot of those populists are directly questioning the relevance of European Union in a sense. So I think there's a lot of those questions will come up in the discussion later on. But I would request Britta to also throw some light on that. So over to you, Britta.
Yes, thank you very much, Niranjan. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm really glad to be back at the ORF. As some of you know, I spent 6 years here as a senior fellow, and these were very fruitful years of my professional life. So I'm glad to see you all again. The far right has been on the rise in Europe and also in the US, as we all know, for more than 2 decades now. And the situation has even changed since I wrote that paper for the ORF quite a bit. I prefer to speak of the far right now instead of right-wing populism, as it has become increasingly clear that most of these parties are not only harvesting discontent that might be there in the electorate, but they want a different order, a different system. It is very important to see that these parties are not conservative, even if some of their talking points are overlapping with conservative ideas. But it must be very clear that the plan to disrupt the establishment is the contrary of a conservative worldview. And on the question if conservative parties realize the difference hinges in a way the democratic system and the survival of conservative parties themselves. But let me explain you a bit what I'm planning to do here in the next 15 minutes or so. In the first step, I would like to give you a short description of the canvas on which the rise of the far right is playing out in Europe at the moment. And in the second step, I would like to suggest 2 theoretical interpretations that go a bit beyond the day-to-day political analysis that we find in many media. These are the theories of the Israeli historian Zev Sternhell and the framework of Horkheimer Adorno laid out in their famous book Dialectic of Enlightenment from 1947. So coming to the big canvas, what we are experiencing, and you all know that very well here in India, is a decline of Western power that is directly related to the rise of other powers, especially, of course, at the moment China, but also to some extent India and other countries that are now gaining economic traction and also increasingly demand a say in what is happening in the world. This marks in many ways, but I think it's increasingly clear now, especially now after Donald Trump has taken over, this marks the end of the post-World War the Second World War order that shaped in many ways, to ensure the dominance of the former colonial powers. This time is clearly over now. The 21st century will be a different century. That is one aspect. The other aspect is the climate crisis that profoundly threatens our way of life, if not as life on this planet as such. And then there's the ascent of new technologies whose future implications we still do not fully understand. I'm mainly talking of artificial intelligence, but to some extent also social media that is already changing the way democracies function. In order to underscore the scope of the crisis, I would like to refer here to the concept of the 3 narcissistic insults of humankind that Sigmund Freud introduced. These insults created enormous resistance as they profoundly changed the way how humans see themselves. This concept of Freud is a very Eurocentric concept But as I'm speaking about Europe here now, I believe it is relevant. So I would just like to tell you the three narcissistic insults that Freud talks about is the cosmological insult. That is the theory of Copernicus that actually takes Earth out of the center of the universe as where it was put by the church. But after Copernicus, Earth just became another planet in a small part of the universe and not the center anymore. The second narcissistic insult is the biological insult by Charles Darwin's theory on the origin of species, where humans are, other than the church actually taught, are not the crown of the creation anymore, but just a link in the chain of different biological species. And in fact, apes are our nearest relatives. And the third insult is the psychological insult that was brought up by Freud himself, who taught that actually the ego is not the Lord in its own house, because we are often driven by unconscious desires that we cannot fully control. So these were the three insults that Freud was speaking about. And I think we're at the moment experiencing a new insult, and that is the insult of artificial intelligence that threatens to take away the last residue of human exceptionism, the power of the human intellect. In a way, one can also call the climate crisis a narcissistic insult as well, as it shows that our home planet Earth cannot be endlessly exploited without ruining the basis of our very existence. This calls into question the way our economic production, the capitalist system that relies on economic growth. So we are seeing narcissistic insults, and my thesis is that the rise of the far right is a reaction to that. When you look at the climate crisis, the answer of the far right is exactly what you can see. I don't know if you saw the movie Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's plain denial, and I think Sigmund Freud would have found this quite amusing. So at the same time, we're in the middle of a new industrial revolution that will probably, for the first time, take away jobs not only from the labor class, as we saw in the first industrial revolution, but from the middle class and from intellectuals as well. We already see that translators, journalists, even academia, the art world, are changing dramatically under the onslaught of artificial intelligence. And social media have already changed what Adorno called the cultural industry. That means the means to influence masses through media. It is not by chance that the far right were the first to notice that social media are a very useful tool to spread their ideas. So when we come to Europe, we see that this revolution is largely being shaped by US tech giants such as Google, Meta, Tesla, and so on. And it becomes increasingly clear also by China. Europe now has slept through the beginning of this revolution and feels the economic consequences already. In 2008, Europe's economy was about 90% the size of the US economy. Now it's dropped to 65%. Still, economically, most Europeans are doing quite well, although inflation and rising prices, especially for housing, lead to the impression that the younger generation, for the first time in the post-war period, is economically not better off than their parents. This all created a deep sense of crisis among Europeans. Additionally, the social fabric of the continent has been changing dramatically as European societies are aging and need immigration in order to keep production and services running. In fact, much more immigration than the one that is already there will be needed in the next decades. And we are already seeing that in different countries, something between 25 and 30% of the population already have a migration a background, and they bring with them many different experiences that do not fit into the mold that the quite homogeneous European societies as we knew them know. So in this context, parties of the far right are gaining support all over Europe, as you already said that. So in Austria, that was the last election that took place. The right-wing extremist Herbert Kickl of the FPÖ is about to become the new chancellor for the first time. This is likely that Austria will have a far-right chancellor. In Italy, of course, Giorgia Meloni is already there as a prime minister. In France, Marine Le Pen is preparing to succeed President Emmanuel Macron. We don't know yet, but it is something that is realistic. It can happen. In the Netherlands, and I think Niraj will talk about that probably a bit more, Geert Wilders' right-wing populist Party for Freedom has formed a government. In Sweden, the far-right Sweden Democrats are backing a center-right government. And in Germany, we have our elections on the 23rd of February. The right-wing extremist AfD is currently scoring around 20% in the polls, and they will be most likely become the second biggest party in the Bundestag, although it is unlikely that they will become part of the government, but a party of that size is already able to influence the political discourse to a large extent. What you can see in the different political groups in the European Parliament is a reflection of these developments on the national level. As in the European Parliament, groups are formed from the national parties, but their representation is based on the scores that they are winning in the elections in their respective countries. So there was a time when almost all far-right parties in Europe were opposed to the EU, but I think Brexit has brought a bit of a change because some of them saw that there are benefits in being in the EU. So somebody like Giorgia Meloni has toned down her rhetoric, and there are others who are already in the EU, such as Viktor Orban, who has been always a master of milking the EU for money, and at the same time negating liberal democracy as a European political concept and as a value. So all these parties are riding high on anti-immigration sentiments, anti-Muslim prejudices, and are often capitalizing on a deep-rooted racism, although many of them at the moment pretend to be not anti-Semitic. However, the war in Gaza has produced a heavy wave of anti-Semitism in Europe, of both types, the old European anti-Semitism and the fairly new Islamic anti-Semitism. Other rallying points of these parties are an enmity to what is called wokeism, antipathy to gender politics, feminism in general, and post-colonialism, as well as climate skepticism. While these are counter-reactions to changing power relations between the West and the rest of the world, between men and women, gender fluidity, the economic and political rise of former colonies, and between man and nature in a time of rising global temperatures, the question remains, why do many European citizens vote for parties that do not offer solutions to any of these problems? The ongoing German electoral campaign, for example, almost solely focuses on how to stop illegal migration, the great picture of the changing world order, the necessary energy transition, and many other topics are not discussed at all. Instead, the far right advocates for what they call remigration, meaning the forced eviction of foreigners from Europe. It ignores the obvious fact that aging European societies will not be able to provide basic services, for example, healthcare and public transport, or fill in a myriad of low-paid jobs in agriculture, restaurants, or the delivery industries. Voters also seem to be oblivious to the fact that most of these parties are openly announcing cuts to social security. This has given rise to the question, why are parts of the European electorate voting against their own interests, as it seems? In order to understand this better, I would like to refer to the two theoretical frameworks that I already mentioned. These are the theories of Zeev, Sternhell, and Horkheimer Adorno. Zeev Sternhell is an Israeli historian who escaped as a child the Holocaust in Poland, and he extensively worked on the topic of fascism in Europe, mainly in France and Italy. What is unique about his reading of fascism is that he treats it as a so-called recurrent possibility of European political thought, not as an aberration of the 20th century. It is useful to look at the far right from this angle, as it helps to understand that fascist thought never really vanished from Europe. For a long time, it was relegated to the fringes, where it survived and has now re-emerged as a sign of a crisis of modernity. Sternhell argues that fascism possesses a coherent ideology with deep roots in European civilization. Long before fascism became a political force, he maintains it was a major cultural phenomenon. He asserts that although fascist ideology was grounded in a revolt against the Enlightenment, it was not a reactionary movement. It represented instead an ideological alternative to Marxism and liberalism, and competed effectively with them by positing a revolt against modernity. Sternhell argues that the conceptual framework of fascism played an important role in its development. Building on radical nationalism and an anti-materialist revision of Marxism, fascism sought to destroy the existing political order and to uproot its theoretical and moral foundations. At the same time, its proponents wished to preserve all the achievements of modern technology and the advantages of the market economy. Nevertheless, fascism opposed every bourgeois value, such as universalism, humanism, progress, natural human rights, and equality. Thus, as Sternhell shows, the fascists adopted the economic aspects of liberalism, but denies its philosophical principles and the intellectual and moral heritage of modernity. So if you look at what's happening in the US at the moment, you can see almost all the aspects mentioned by Sternhell already in place in the Trumpist ideology. The political rhetoric and practice of disruption, the focus on new technology augmented by tech billionaires, the exclusion of those who seem to be weak, such as migrants, women, queer people, religious minorities. Elon Musk's meddling into German elections by supporting the far-right AfD is just the latest sign of the fact that the European far right is ideologically at par with the Republicans under Trump. I would like to conclude here with a reference to the theory of Horkheimer and Adorno laid out in their book Dialectics of Enlightenment. The argument here is slightly different. So I'm basically offering two different interpretations of how to have a look at the developments. As Horkheimer and Adorno argue, the problems posed by the rise of fascism with the demise of the liberal state and the market constitute the theoretical and historical perspectives that frames the overall argument of the book. The two theses are that myth is already enlightenment and enlightenment reverts to mythology. If we perceive European enlightenment and the French Revolution, which with its values of liberté, égalité, fraternité, so freedom, equality, and brotherhood, as the foundation of modern European political thought, Horkheimer and Adorno perceive the collapse or regression of reason that was the rise of National Socialism in Germany into something resembling the very form of superstition and myth out of which reason had supposedly emerged as a result of historical progress or development. Horkheimer and Adorno believe that in the process of enlightenment, modern philosophy had become over-rationalized and an instrument of technology. If we apply this description to the way how politics in the European Union and most European countries have been functioning in the past decades, we can clearly see from where the current backlash comes. the politics of TINA, as it was called often. TINA stands for There Is No Alternative. Of the various European governments, and among them German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was a very popular chancellor, and in her very long chancellorship, she very much stood for this kind of politics, a reasonable approach that believed in itself that there's no alternative to their own way of doing politics. And now, and this happened also on the European level. I mean, if you look at the European Union as an institution, it has tried to codify all eventualities of politics in a framework that has almost become too complicated for people to understand and to maneuver with. And much of what you hear now of the complaints, I mean, these complaints are everywhere now that we are over bureaucratized. They are obviously having a point. So there is a backlash against a technocratic interpretation of politics that, in the theory of Horkheimer and Adorno, is an aberration of the focus on reason and enlightenment in European thinking. So Horkheimer Adorno further argue that anti-Semitism is a deeply rooted irrational phenomenon that stems from the failure of the Enlightenment project and the inherent contradiction of bourgeois society. And I think we can add here that anti-migration sentiments that are now all over have to a large extent replaced anti-Semitism in the current political discourse in Europe, although anti-Semitism surely persists. Horkheimer and Adorno further argue that the Jews, and I would also like to add the migrants, serve as universal scapegoats onto which individuals and societies project their deepest fears, anxieties, and neuroses. According to their analysis, the complex and often contradictory nature of modern life generates a sense of alienation, powerlessness, and psychological distress. Unable to confront these feelings directly, people seek to externalize them by identifying a tangible other to blame for their problems. The Jews, or the migrants, with their marginalized status, become an ideal target for this projection. By attributing their own negative impulses to the Jews or the migrants, they are able to maintain a sense of psychological coherence and moral purity. This irrational projective hatred is further reinforced by economic resentment and nationalistic ideology, which provide a broader social framework for anti-Semitism. Ultimately, Adorno and Horkheimer see the persecution of Jews as a symptom of the unresolved contradictions and pathologies of modern society, which can only be addressed through a radical critique of the Enlightenment project and the social conditions that sustain it. So, and I will stop with this.
Yeah, thanks, Britta. I think quite a comprehensive overview, and I think a lot of insight you have thrown, especially quoting some of those scholars. And I completely agree with the issues that you have introduced. The causal factors, including the economic decline, and whether it's also technology, which is also shaping the lot of narratives in Europe, and of course major issues about the climate issue that you said. It has a lot of implications because if you look at even in America and in many other places, even this is at the heart of what's happening in the political discourse. So I think you have raised a number of issues, but the one thing that you quoted, that fascism never vanished from European politics or European society, is something probably requires a deeper examination. But I think this is where I think a lot of other people will add on. But I think I now turn the table to Neeraj, who will also bring his perspective, because he's also a person who does a lot of theoretical and empirical stuff, so he can actually introduce some of the concept and connect with even larger global politics also with the European things. Over to you, Neeraj.
Thank you. And so, so it'll be very difficult to follow Rita because I read about all of her work and all of her experiences, and I thought that she will be giving you a very good overview of what's happening. And maybe what I can contribute is by adding some theoretical inputs. But then she covered not only the empirical part, she also covered the theoretical part. So that gives me very little room to shine. Uh, but,
There
but
might be some other theories.
yes, so I'll pursue and carry on. Um, so I'll try to speculate and triangulate across different theoretical perspectives, and then we can have an open discussion about whether they apply or not. I'm not particularly sold on the idea that any one of them applies or does not apply. So one particularly powerful hypothesis is that called that of Lipset and Rokan, and they wrote in the late 1960s, 1967, and that's called the freezing hypothesis. And the freezing hypothesis said that political contestation has frozen across fixed social cleavages in Europe. And he's writing and they're writing in the 1960s, and they identified four cleavages. One was church state, the other was center periphery, the third was between the emerging bourgeois and the feudal axis, and the final was between agriculture and industry. And they said that these these cleavages were very relevant when democracy was kind of shaping up in European contexts, and they continued and to the current day, and they are writing in the 1960s. So they are almost arguing that the dimensions of political contestation in Europe in the 1960s reflected the cleavages of 1920s. Uh, Now that is a problem, right? In a democracy, the dimensions of political contestation should align with the dimensions of popular discontent and contemporaneous discontent. But if they align with the discontents of your grandfather's generation or your grandmother's generation, then politics is kind of de-aligned with society. And so the question is that is can that explain the rise of the radical right in Europe? Is it because politics continues to be de-aligned from society? In Netherlands, uh, the joke used to be that we have elections every 2 years and we elect the same prime minister. And that prime minister is currently the NATO Secretary General. And it was same with Germany. It's not like they had elections every 2 years, but Angela Merkel had a very long tenure. And there's very little to distinguish between mainstream parties in terms of positions. Like all of them literally had very similar policy positions. Like Tony Blair's government was not very different from the initial conservative governments that followed David Cameron, or George Bush Senior was not very different from Bill Clinton, who was not very different from George Bush Junior. Uh, and even today, the current incumbent government, it's called the traffic light government because it's a coalition between green, red, and orange. So in that sense, I'm not saying that they're not very different, but they're not bold enough to depart too radically from what Angela Merkel was doing. And then in Netherlands, we have a party called the NSE, which is a part of the incumbent government, who just decided to not have a policy position. Their position is that we will do whatever is to be done in a most efficient manner. So if you want to reduce expenditure, we'll do it in an efficient manner. If you want to increase expenditure, we'll do it in an efficient manner. So we'll just bring efficiency into the government, which is not really an ideological position per se. So in that sense, was it the de-ideologic uh, ideologic station, like this word does not exist, I just made it up, but is it that the axis on which political contestation is happening is no longer relevant to the popular discontents in the society, and that is why these societies are seeking for alternatives on the extremes? The second speculation is this very powerful hypothesis called hollowing out the state. According to this hypothesis, like, state capacity is hollowed out under very specific circumstances. And that circumstance is when the majority group sees a threat from the previous minority, or the dominant group sees a threat from a group that could be the majority but is not dominant. Uh, so just to kind of explain this theory, this was observed in the American South, where when after the Civil War, there was the Reformation period. In that period, the white population in the American South hollowed out the state. They totally denuded the state of their ability to tax, because now tax collections would not only be spent on the white population but also on the black population, and they don't want to do that, and therefore you kind of just destroy state capacity. Now this has been tested in the context of the American South, and it has been tested in the context of UP in India, where there's a large support among upper castes to reduce state capacity when they feel threatened that state resources would be diverted towards Muslims or the lower castes. So this has been tested in these two contexts. Now the question is this kind of rise of right nothing but an attempt to hollow out the state in the rise in the light of immigration and in the light of more cultural heterogeneity in states which tended to be very culturally and ethnically homogeneous? Again, this is a question. I don't know if this applies or not. The third theoretical approach that I could think of is this just ethnic outbidding? And this has been tested a lot in the context of Sri Lanka, and we look at Sri Lanka of today, but Sri Lanka was never a part of British India. It was never a part of Myanmar's administration of Myanmar by the British. It was a part of the same British group that administered Australia and New Zealand. Sri Lanka was a very high capacity state. In fact, when by the time they achieved independence, so much of power was already devolved to the local population that it's almost as if it went unnoticed for the local population. It was not very consequential. It didn't come out from as much of a struggle as it came out in India. So they started with very high capacity, with very high bureaucratic capacity. They started with high levels of education. There used to be good universities and a high level of institutionalization of parties. And then they indulged in ethnic outbidding, which lasted for decades, 5-6 decades, to the extent that today Sri Lankan state does not really exist to the extent that it existed in the 1950s or the 1960s. So now is this question of ethnic outbidding that is happening in Europe, and in that context, one example would be UK, though UK does not like to be called itself a part of Europe or at least a part of EU, where there were consecutive conservative governments which started to just outbid on the basis of migration, like who can be more cruel to refugees and who can be more cruel to the migrant. And is it just this case of ethnic outbidding that is now going into mainstream Europe? uh, then the fourth is kind of like the like Polanyi's revenge on Europe, in the sense that is this the rise of the right, or is this the secular decline of the left? You know, if you look at 1950s, and if you look at levels of taxation, it was very high. Like the top marginal tax rate even in US was 70-80%, and in Europe also. If you look at what has happened to the tax rates, if you look at what has happened to on social spending, there has been a secular decline starting from the 60s, irrespective of who is in power. And even the left has shifted right, in the sense Barack Obama would be to the right of Nixon or Eisenhower, and though Nixon and Eisenhower were both Republican presidents. So in that sense, what has left itself has shifted, and it has shifted towards the right. And in that sense, there has been this secular rise of the right or secular decline of the left. And so in that sense, it's not like anything different that is happening. And finally, and this is not theoretical, it's empirical. When I moved to the Netherlands, and this was the first time I'd gone to Germany for an academic conference, and half of the conversations at that academic conference was about uh, the dismal disastrous state in which the German academic or university system was in. It's in a very very bad shape as compared to other comparable um countries of comparable level of development. And 50% of the other 50% of the conversations was about the dismal state of the Deutsche Bahn, the train service in Germany. So much so that there was a time that Switzerland is very reluctant to allow German trains to come in, because German trains are always late. Once I was traveling from Berlin to Amsterdam, and halfway the train stopped in Hanover because the train driver's duty hours were over, and then they took 8 hours to replace the driver. And with this, Angela Merkel's uh, decade and a half reign, there has been a continuous underinvestment in society, in terms of in public infrastructure, in terms of education, and so much so that we don't realize how poor Europe is. And I'm not comparing it with US, with India, but rather I'm comparing it with US. Now in US, West Virginia is their poorest state. The poorest state in US is West Virginia. If you look at G7 countries, except Japan and Germany, every country is poorer than West Virginia. Every country is poorer than the poorest state in the US. And where is Germany and Japan? Germany and Japan are richer than West Virginia but poorer than Mississippi, which is their second most poorest state. So every country in G7 is poorer than Mississippi. Uh, that is the level of per capita, in terms of per capita income, in terms of yeah, they don't have trains. They like to burn fuel with their huge SUVs. But in terms of per capita income, in terms of Europe, there's a big gap that has opened up in between the US and Europe, and that gap is so big. Like one company uh, like Google or Tesla or Nvidia or Microsoft, Facebook is greater in terms of market cap than than all stock exchanges combined in Europe. And the, like, if you take out ASML, which is one company that is doing well, there's literally no innovation. There is literally recently there was this report which was prepared by Mario Draghi and presented to the EU, in which they talked about how there has been no innovation. There is no entrepreneurial activity. There is no new companies that have come up. There is no new technologies that are coming up in Europe, and there's this increasing gap between Europe and US in terms of standard of living, in terms of wealth, in terms of innovation. So now the question is, uh, in the light of this stagnation, who do you vote for? I'm not trying to be an apologist to the right, but whether it is the center right or the center left, they have delivered nothing in terms of growth. Germany has still not been able to recover after COVID. Um, so now the center right, center left cannot deliver anything, and the extreme left is promising things which will definitely not deliver it. So who do you vote for? I'm not saying that the right has the solution, but right at least is talking about the problem, or right is at least giving solutions which may not work, but at least they are saying that, okay, we'll do this, and this might lead to growth, or this might lead to innovation. So in that sense, if you're really looking to get out of that stagnant environment you're in, and you're convinced that the right is offering solutions, which in this case is the only party that is only, or are the only formation that is doing that, then maybe that is your best bet. Uh, so that is one rational view for, or perceived rationality, like people who are voting on the right. And finally, yes, it could be all of this is kind of not true, and at the end of the day, there is this basic instinct about ethnic solidarity, about a perceived taste for discrimination, a kind of fear of the immigrant, fear of people who don't look like you, and that is what is kind of fueling the rise of the right. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think some very, I would say, lot of theoretical insights, and also you provided a lot of empirical data about Europe's decline, and not only decline in terms of economy, it's also in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship. Which Europe was leading at one point, uh, and then of course something that you said about whether it is sort of a secular decline of the left or the secular rise of the right. So it's something that intrigued me. But I think also what you said about Germany and other thing, I think it needs some bit of this thing response from Brita. So I think couple of minutes I would ask Brita to respond to what Neeraj said, and then we'll open up.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your input. I think this is very important what you said. Obviously, what I did not touch on, but it is true that the decline of the left and the rise of the right are in a way connected. The left has not recovered from the collapse of the Soviet Union and the communist ideology as it were, and it is lacking profoundly in a new vision. It's lacking intellectually in a new vision, and also practically, also because there is very little support at the moment, which leads to declining of funding and so on. So the left is really in a very difficult position. That is one important aspect. What I would like to challenge a bit, what you mentioned about who do you vote for? I think it's an important question, but my argument was a bit different, and I would like to stick to that, is that I do not see that there are solutions on the far right to revive growth in Europe. What I observe is, especially at the moment in Germany, that the electoral campaigns are solely focusing on immigration, which is basically the contrary of a focus on growth, because you will need immigration. And apart from that, I don't see any concrete political concepts. The far right, at least in Germany, is solely living on resentments, and it is their clear goal. They are formulating it that way. Is their clear goal to destroy the conservative parties, and this is a development that you have been seeing, and they are at the moment trying to do this, and Elon Musk is helping them with this by advocating for the AfD. The conservative parties are their main opponent, because they believe that once the conservative parties are out of the way, then they are the only political force that caters to the sentiments of people who are more right of center, whether they see themselves as fascists or if they see themselves as conservatives. But that is one point. The other point I would like to make is that there is a discourse, and the discourse is right. You described all the problems that people, of course, see in Germany about the decline, but that is also exaggerated in the sense that indeed under Angela Merkel, Germany was doing extremely well economically. One must say that. The economy was growing, and we must remember that it's only 3 years ago that Angela Merkel actually left the office. Only 3 years. The traffic light coalition just collapsed in November, not because they were so much the same of Angela Merkel, but because they were not able to overcome their differences. And these differences occurred largely because they were seeking for answers to the biggest questions, especially the Greens, of course, who have been trying to come up with very concrete suggestions how to tackle the energy crisis. And one must take this into account, that the war in Ukraine and the boycott of energy imports from Russia has created a very at that point in time when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was an imminent threat that people would not be able, without Russian oil and gas, to heat their apartments. And in Europe, it's not like here, especially in Northern Europe. So there was a need to react to this, and I think the Greens did fairly well in that. They managed to secure energy supply. They came up with a law that suggested that you would replace all the old, gas heaters with this new technology that created a lot of trouble, because people were afraid that they would have to take out their old gas heaters and invest 20,000 euros into new ones. There is a very clear reaction to an actual political crisis that is unprecedented in Europe. We have to remember that is, and also, of course, that for the first time after the war, there is after the Second World War, there is war against in Europe. And especially for the older population, as like my parents who still experienced the war, it is utter trepidation and fear. And this has also ripped apart the fabric of many political parties, because there are divided discussions, especially among the Social Democrats, to what extent we need to, in order to secure our own borders, we need to support Ukraine, or are we risking that the war will actually extend to other parts of Europe as well? So the energy crisis and the crisis of how to deal with the war are the main problems, I think, at the moment when it comes to that. The lack of innovation, I think that is a serious point, and
that's, I think, issue that we didn't cover. I think the war and energy crisis also brought. Yeah, Neeraj.
I would like to offer two comments on that. One is just basically data to just support what she just said. The latest German consumer confidence survey has this two very interesting sets of questions, where the first question is about whether Germany is doing well as an economy, and a large supermajority disagrees that Germany. They say that Germany is not doing well as an economy, and there's no economic growth. And then the question is about their affordability. Has there been a reduction in their ability to spend or afford things? And there is no decline, no reported decline. So there is this divergence where people think that the economy is not doing well, but somehow they don't feel the pinch in their pockets. And this but this was drawn out in the US also. In the US, we saw that the US economy is doing spectacularly well under Biden, but there it was the opposite, where people were complaining about their loss of buying power. Yeah, but so it was like Germany is kind of like right now in an inverse situation as compared to the US in terms of attitude towards overall growth and attitudes towards their pocket. And
I'm Karthikeya Batra. I'm incoming faculty at Azim Premji University. So because this is an economic point, I guess. So this could be explained in multiple ways, I guess. One is one is welfare payments. The other is like if you go to Spain, it's a stagnant economy, but prices are really low. That's general equilibrium for you. When there's not a lot of growth, prices will of course be stagnant. But that's a separate point. I'll offer a thesis on which want to get Beta's opinion. So because I've discussed this with Neeraj already, and my thesis side kind of simplifies things from a bird's eye view, and I don't know whether that's correct or not. I think just beyond Europe, there's a general trend towards the right across the world, right? And one way of looking at it is that societal directions are shaped by shocks. So we in 1945 had a huge shock in the form of World War II, where the right was condemned for its mistakes and the whole world saw what it led to. Post which we entered a phase of some kind of a left constructed institutional consensus. Whether it's, the UN, whether it's issues of climate, whether it's refugees, economic development, the model, welfareism, etc. And that seemed to have been going well. I mean, you had the Reagans and the Thatchers, notwithstanding that, but it seemed to be going well until it was interrupted by two more shocks within a 7-year period, 9/11 and 2008 economic crisis. One broke the economic side of the consensus and the other broke the social side of the consensus. And that was then compounded by the rise of social media, which, Beta, as you rightly said, I absolutely agree with you, the right was able to co-opt really well. And one of the reasons why it was able to co-opt it really well was that the right's messaging is not about constructing something or maintaining the sanity of certain institutions, it's about destroying what exists. Because it's a left-driven consensus from the 1940s. And so that messaging, given the nature of social media, becomes very easy to sort of put across, and the right was able to do a great job of it. And then to expect that the far right will have solutions for me is actually just too much, because I don't even think that they're thinking along those lines politically. For them, it's about a manufactured consent which is failing. And so let's get back to primal instincts that Neeraj touched upon eventually. primal instincts of male hegemony, primal instincts of, just homogeneous populations, etc. So what is happening across the world for me probably is maybe cyclical in nature, but for me is determined by the kind of shocks that we face and how one side has been able to take advantage of it and the other one has not been able to. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Actually moved from the United States a little bit more than a year ago. So when you mentioned the Wyoming, that caught my ear. Now, I heard the American economy is doing superbly well. And the justification for this is that growth is very high. But growth is not the end. Growth is a means to an end. And I think to the voters who, by polling, did not think the economy was doing superbly well, that growth didn't really end up benefiting their lives or like their ability to. I mean, I think the metric is purchasing power. I'm not an economist, but I don't know if that was one-to-one. The other thing which was interesting was you're talking about the populist right and how they go to all these, how everyone is like looking for that. But there were leftist policies that Biden implemented. When those were implemented, his approval rating, there's a positive correlation between his approval rating when those were implemented. There's a negative correlation when those were taken away. In certain issues like, say, climate, Republicans, independents, and Democrats, the polling said, oh, that's actually popular. Like those far left, some of those climate, like, taking some of that thing, taxing the rich is popular. So I don't know that this narrative that everyone is just looking for the right is particularly accurate. And I would suggest, if I could put my own thesis, perhaps the more effective, at least political counter to a populist right would be a populist left.
One small question, one or two questions. Is far right, is the present reflection or reincarnation or reinvention of the fascism of 30s? That is one. If not, what is the difference between the then fascism and the present rise of the far left? Sorry, far right. Second is far right as a political movement or a cultural phenomena essentially anti-democratic? That is second. And third, on social media, what I know is that even in America, in recent presidential elections, the social media played a great role in messaging the Trump's message, as you said about the Europe. In Europe also, the far right seems to be using social media greatly to their advantage. The reason being, the mainstream media, both in Europe and in America, is dominated by the so-called left and centrist forces. They hardly have a space for anybody who is either not a left or not a centrist. So this, social media has come as a great weapon in the hands of those who have not got the space in the mainstream media. This is what I feel now, hearing a lot of people about the US elections as Trump. See, otherwise, Trump was talking of abolishing TikTok. But suddenly after elections, he's developed a different approach towards TikTok. That explains, he has realized that TikTok and X has done tremendously to his favor during US election campaign. And that space he never got during his first term or during this election in the mainstream media. Thank you.
It's some of the very important questions. I think I'll ask Britta first to respond. I think some question about he raised. You also hinted about that revival of fascism or the thing, and then whether essentially they're anti-democratic, or what Karthik said, or the thing is it's even I sometimes feel it's more like cyclical maybe. It's another strand, may not be completely anti-democratic, but they represent different value system, different sort of a. So, Brita and then Neeraj. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Regarding your question and your framing, I think if you describe the post-World War II order as a left consensus, you are already falling victim to a rightist framing. You're a bit younger than me. I was born in 1966, and the world I grew up with was very far away from being leftist. You know, all over Europe, women were not involved in politics. Women were at that time not even allowed to open their own bank account. It was impossible to think of having a chancellor or a political leader. It was forbidden to be gay. In fact, in Germany, more than 100,000 people were jailed to be gay until this paragraph was removed under the social democratic government of Gerhard Schröder in the 1990s. So was this a leftist social political order that we had? Is it? I mean, what happened after World War II is the world recovered from the total destruction of Europe, where, I mean, not only 6 million Jews were killed, but many others, million people were killed under the onslaught of an ideology that was basically nihilistic and destructive to the extent that it almost erased European civilization. So to talk about a leftist consensus after the UN set up some basic rules, the rule of law, human rights in the center of what we try to achieve as mankind, these were ideas that were drawn from, of course, they were drawn from political ideas that were there before, but they were totally negated by the Nazi regimes. So I think the framing is wrong. We had, of course, a period, and I think after the fall of the Berlin Wall, basically in 1989, there was this so-called unipolar moment when everybody believed that this now is as Fukuyama put it, the end of history, and democracy will rule all over the world, and everybody will understand that democracy is the best way to live by. And during that period, obviously, the pendulum went to the left in many ways. I mean, especially socially, but surely not economically, because the Marxist ideas, the communist ideas were discredited, and nothing actually replaced them. So the idea of social equality was not faring very strong and in this period, although social liberties for other parts of the society that before they couldn't even think of happened. So that would be partly an answer to your question. Then to come to the gentleman's question, is the far right a reincarnation of fascism? I would say it is indeed an avatar of fascism. It shares, and this is what I tried to explain when I was referring to these theories. They share the same political philosophy. They share the same impulses of actually creating and anti-Semitism, creating the specter of another. if you look at what is actually being discussed at the moment in Europe about migration, but one must make no mistake here that of course we have a large population of migrants. Some of them are also Indians, and they are already suffering from these discourses. People have been killed. I mean, they were already attacks on refugee homes under the chancellorship of Helmut Kohl. They're talking in about the 1980s. So that's why, I mean, there is fascism has always been there, although it was electorally not as strong as it is. But it happened that migrants were killed throughout the time, and absolutely, and I mean, one needs to think about it, that if you are a Jew in Germany, until today, you are not able to just enter a synagogue and pray there, because all the synagogues have always had police protection and heavy armed protection, because you cannot operate in Germany until now a synagogue without the fear of being attacked. So is it anti-democratic? If you look at what has happened in Hungary, that used to be a democracy, I think it has come to the point where it is impossible now to get rid in a democratic way of Viktor Orban. So we do have already a country that is undemocratic in Europe, and I personally have no doubt that once these forces will get strong enough in other countries, they will do the same. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. I'll cover 3 points. First is about whether this is the equivalence between fascism and right. For me, one central tenet about fascism is also corporate interests and corporate lobbies, and that is missing in some context, not in every context, but in some context that is weak. So in that sense, there is deficiencies in that fascism. Then the second is going back to what I said, a de-alignment between the dimensions of contestation and the dimensions of popular discontent. So from what he said, like, Biden has been simultaneously very successful, but simultaneously also among the most unpopular presidents, and popularity is now almost like 40% has almost become both the base and the ceiling. And over there, the question is, what does it mean to have a popular consent? Like, it's not just environment, even abortion access, or even gun rights, or not gun rights, but restrictions on gun rights are very popular in the US. Large supermajorities support abortion access, and large supermajorities would like some kind of regulations on gun ownership. But that does not really get translated into political will to do that. So there's always this discontent between what's popular and what's political. But now, in the third point, I'll immediately contradict myself, because now what I'm talking is about a very popular attitude that is anti-immigrant. Now, anti-immigration is very popular in the US, very popular in the UK, and very popular in the Europe. Now, let's look at how parties are kind of responding to it. There is the far right, which says that, oh, immigrants are bad, we'll get rid of immigration, right? And that's the reason, that is everything that is bad with the economy, with the society, and everything. Now, the center right, how do they respond? The center right responds by saying that, yes, you're right, but we need immigrants for something, so we'll get high-skilled immigrant or something like that. But they agree with the fundamental belief that immigration is bad. And then there is the left, which also believes that immigration is bad. Like it's not like Labour or Democrats are very open arm about immigration, but then they will introduce elements of equity, they will introduce elements of legal process, or they will introduce elements of democratic decline, or the necessity to have immigration or something. So it's not like any party is going to say no, immigrants are good. They're all going to say that immigrants are bad, but we need to do this or that. Whereas the right, the far right is the only party which is offering a clear cut immigrants are bad and therefore we'll get rid of it. It's like a simple solution they're offering. It might be a nonsense solution, but that's a solution. And now, if it is popular and you really believe that immigrants are bad, who do you vote for? Do you vote for the duplicate, that is the center right? In the case of Netherlands, it is VVD, or in UK, it is the Conservatives. Or do you vote for the original, the Reform Party in the UK or the PVV in Netherlands? You would vote for the original, right? Like the party which is really offering you or kind of mirroring your views. So in that sense, I feel that they don't have solutions, but they're at least clear in what they are trying to articulate. It's not like a caveated conditional statement that they're trying to make where they agree with you, but then the solutions has to be a little different from what you want.
I think both of you have probably thrown up a number of issues. I think that would probably require another session altogether. But I think some interesting point by you both, and what Neeraj also said about about whether it is the right or the center right or the left on issues like immigration or the thing. I think each one of them have maybe some people are more pronounced like right or the thing, but others are also equally opposed to immigrations. Those who have been following also Biden administration, in fact, sent back millions actually of immigrants back to their during their first 2 years. So Democrats are not in any way kind of immigrant friendly or the thing. It is just that the right wing makes more noises, and they, as you said, they have probably invested greatly on social media and tech, and that you see not only in Europe or America, you see here also. So in a sense, this is something on which I think they have probably done well since their opportunity to voice and use, especially the technology. Digital technology has come as a huge boon, and as a sort of someone who's been tracking democracy, I see that implication of technology on democracy, on the electoral system, the way elections interference, disinformation, fake news, conspiracy theories. Today, it is so difficult to even to safeguard any elections anywhere in the world with best of the sort of safeguards and mechanisms, because interference can happen in multiple way, and those who are watching actually just Delhi elections, campaign is going on. You just look at, just to follow the Twitter and some of the kind of disinformation, fake news, and kind of narratives, baseless narratives are being spread, and a lot of people fall victim to that other thing. So in that space, right wing in some way or other flourishes, because in some sense they have easy what he said, because they are basically blaming the entire system which they think that were brought up and mounted by the left wing or left wing extremists, what they call. Uh,
Social media is not all fake. Please.
no.
Don't give me this. Social media can be used for very good things with very
No,
good
I'm
intentions.
not saying no.
My point was very limited. Why is it that the far left?
I'm not
right,
actually. I understood your point. I'm not. What I'm
it's
actually
not all
saying.
fake. Please don't.
No. Fake news I'm talking about in the context of elections. If you look at, because I've been tracking fake news and disinformation for almost 3-4 years, I can tell you 60 to 70% of election news, election campaign, other things are fake. not only fake, now you have deep fakes actually with AI and these things. It's far easier actually. And these are, I'm not talking about just from my own, you just look at the data provided by Meta and Google in their own reports recently after Indian elections. You just look at number of fake narratives and disinformations, you'll be horrified actually. So you just have to look at the data, other thing, and this is not about India, it's all over the world, I think, facing. So I think the point you raised, I think, is something, but uh, there is also something about, I think, nationalism. You know, this right wing, Europe had experienced, that entire Nazism or fascism, other thing, in some or other, they were anti-Semitic and those things, but were also based on nationalism. So that nationalism takes a very ugly turn many times. So today, probably in some way, I was actually talking to one of the European scholars recently, who is based in Czech Republic. So he was telling actually one of the reason why actually this a lot of people are actually shifting their way to the right wing populist is largely that sense of decline in Europe. They feel, because look at the war actually, Ukraine war, other thing, and a lot of them feel helpless. They cannot actually, because they have underfunded and not really, and totally in somewhere or other dependent on America, NATO sort of support for their security. The entire security has been in somewhere or other outsourced. So when today you have a war at your doorstep and Russia is actually doing everything what it wants, other thing, you feel insecure. And Europe as a union, European Union is different, but European countries are smaller. Many of them are smaller countries. I think have no real actual military capacity to even withstand sort of a. So in a sense, this is one. And then second thing, the economic decline. What Neeraj and they mentioned is very sharp actually, and lot of this thing has actually flown to the global south, because China's rise in the last 3 decades has been phenomenal. In fact, a lot of economic activities has shifted to the southward, and then India, of course, and many others. In terms of innovation space, also you look at where China is today. 20 years back, China was nowhere actually. So that also creates a kind of frustration and in some sort of a way anxiety about your future or the thing. And that way, actually, a lot of these populists are able to capitalize. What Trump is talking. I mean, America is one of the most probably absurd case actually. I mean, you are talking about the MAGA thing, making America great. It is the superpower, and economically, America has been doing well. In fact, 27 trillion, economy. America has not declined economically. China has, dramatically, risen. So also India and many other. But unlike Europe, America has maintained its and in terms of tech and other thing, America is the top way. But still, there, even the right wings are able to exploit and bring. Yeah.
One of the reasons, I guess, so focus not just on averages, it's also the distribution of the economy, right? So West Virginia may be better off than a lot of European countries, but if West Virginia is a less equal society than some of the European countries, then which one do you choose? So I guess one of the things in which we are trained as academicians is the average. But in data, there are multiple moments of data. So the first moment is the mean, the second moment is the variance. And I think we've now reached a point where that second moment, the variance, is creating a lot of political developments. That I might be growing on average basis, but where's my right tail going, where's my left tail going?
I think before we close, I just want to request both the panelists to maybe spend 1 or 2 minutes, give their closing remarks, and then we'll close. Yeah, I'll start with Britta first.
Thank you very much for all your input. It was a very interesting discussion. I think that what we see is really a profound change in how the world is organized, and that creates enormous fear. We need to hope that we will be also out of this shock create constructive solutions, how we can actually live together on a planet that is actually it shows increasingly that it is limited. So while nobody wants to take into account that it is a zero-sum game, so what if China comes up, the rest has to go down. We must probably think about other ways of organizing ourselves and our economy in order to secure a peaceful planet. What I see now is actually worrying, and I don't think that this dog eat dogs world that some people are advocating at the moment is anything that I would like my son to experience in the future.
That's
So I have one source of being optimistic, in the sense, and my optimism stems from the incompetence of the far right, in the sense, um, they don't have solutions. They don't have to even when they have solutions, they don't have the capacity to implement those solutions. Um, so I feel that it's like, you want to taste something, you taste it and you find it super nasty, and then you don't taste it again. So it could be something like that. But then I also have a source of pessimism, because some people don't learn. They've So now I feel that it's not necessary that the world will taste it and reject it. It would be like the world will taste it, reject it, and then 4 years later again try to taste it again. Um, so 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 that is my source of pessimism as far as the rise of the far right is concerned. Thank you.
wonderful. I think I totally agree with what Neeraj said. There is optimism, and there is always hope that of course inherent contradictions with these right-wing parties and sort of their and it's a classic example what Brita also cited is about the aging population in Europe. They need a lot of workforce. So how much you may say anti-immigrant sentiment and all that other on the ground, you need a lot of those people because they're cheap labor and skilled labor, other thing available almost a happy price or even less than that, ready to work, toil there. Not like the example you gave that the driver will actually leave leave the train actually, and so that sort of extremism will not work, and you need those populations. So, and then the interesting thing about the example about the far right thing is the Meloni of Italy. She has relaxed the anti-immigrant sort of rules, other thing, and has allowed actually lakhs of labor from outside to work in Italy because they need the workforce. So in a sense, they will be like Trump. They will be putting something for the public other thing, and in underneath they'll be doing something else. So that sort of things, I think those contradictions will come up eventually, and how they are efficient to run a government, to run a system, address number of issues. It's not going to be as simple or what they are saying, because it will go through lot of democratic contestations. A lot of counter will come up, and in democracy, these ideas, other things will not go without a fight. So we have a long road and long way to go. But I think with democratic system and the global order and whatever rules-based order we have, I think we still have hope that we will ensure that the Nazism doesn't happen again. The 1930s was probably a different era. Today you'll have events like Gaza can take place where massacre can happen. Sort of almost like an entire population can be targeted, but I think it will probably happen in a limited scale. So we still have hope, and with this, I thank both the panelists. Thanks for your time and enlightening. And this issue we cannot address in just 1.5 hours. So I think we'll have more opportunity to engage on what's happening in Europe in near future. And I invite all of you to have a cup of tea and some samosa. Thanks.